Tonight's presentation is Fun Western New York History with Jack Kowiak. Jack, who's presented to us many times, is a retired market research manager from Eastman Kodak who enjoys researching and presenting material he finds interesting. Jack speaks on a variety of topics to numerous organizations in the Rochester area. In addition, he teaches regular classes at the Penfield Recreation Center. Jack's goal is to present programs that both educate and entertain, and I can tell you from my past experiences with Jack that these presentations are always incredible. So we're about to have a fun time and an evening at home in the warmth of our seats and maybe even our bedrooms. So take it away, Jack.
Thank you very much, Drew. Well, the name of my talk is Fun Western New York History. And I gave it this name because sometimes when I remember history class, when we used to have it about New York, it was kind of the same old, you know? Same old stories about Sam Patch jumping off the old bridge there into the water. And oh my goodness, how many times can we hear about Susan B. Anthony and George Eastman? I worked for Kodak and God loved George Eastman, but boy, we got a lot of George Eastman. And then you got the Erie Canal, and we're really getting hit with that again and again this year because of the 250th anniversary. So it's almost like enough already. Let's get something new here and maybe get something kind of fun that we haven't heard before. And that's the purpose of my talk. Actually, it's a series of 3 talks, and this is the first one. So this is kind of stuff a little bit left out of the history books, but perhaps it should have been in there all along after you hear about these people. So my first story is kind of a fairy tale, kind of one of these once upon a time kind of stories. Once upon a time, west of here, not too far, maybe about 60 miles, up in northern Niagara County. Town today is called Cambria, but back then it was called Warren's Corner. And actually, we can go back even earlier to about the 1840s to talk about this gentleman. He was a farmer. But he was allergic to work, which isn't a good combination to be a farmer and to be allergic to work. What he was more interested in is being a part-time preacher, and he was involved with politics. He was really into Buchanan and his presidency and all types of other different things. But work, manual labor came kind of way down the line. So he had a pretty fertile wife, and they started having kids, and he thought to himself, great, the kids will pick up the labor part. And they had the first kid, and it was a girl. And then they had another girl. And then 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 one more girl. 7 girls. But he thought to himself, well, many hands make easy work. And he set the gals to work on the farm. And they toiled. This was fairly heavy manual labor for these kind of small girls. So he thought to himself, well, this isn't fair that these my children are working like this. I need to do something about it. So rather than pitching in, he had another idea. He said, well, rather than these kind of digging in the ground for these crops and this kind of stuff, maybe I can give them something easier to raise, like a turkey, maybe a whole bunch of turkeys. So he turned it into a turkey farm, a great big turkey farm, which was quite popular in the 1800s. And these gals were working their turkey farm, but they were just barely scraping by with their existence. And these 7 gals would work around barefoot all the time. They never had any kind of shoes. And their clothes were fairly raggy. And the mother had to make everything at home, even all their own soaps and stuff like that. So the children used to always complain when they were in school that they kind of smelled funny, you know? The gals kind of all had these kind of ponytails, and they say, you know, your hair, everything smells funny because the mother was making all the own soaps and shampoos and stuff like that. Well, the townspeople rarely saw these gals. They'd see them going to school, but they never really see them out on the farm or kind of when they were driving their turkeys to market, because they would tend to hide, because they were pretty ashamed of the fact that they were barefoot all the time and their clothes were kind of raggy. They only had one really good dress that they could wear, each of the gals, and they saved that for one day a week when they went to church. Because one of the things they loved to do was to sing in the choir, and they all had magnificent voices. And the people in the town marveled at how beautifully these young girls could sing. Well, the father thought, well, I got to do something here. I can't have these kids, working so hard. So what should I do? Well, rather than pitching in and helping out, he had another great idea. He says, well, these gals got some pretty nice voices. So what if we kind of go on the road and we have like the singing Sutherland sisters? And I make them an act to go across the country and sing, and we'll make money that way as opposed to with the turkeys. Better than getting his hands dirty, right? So they went out there and they do this big act where they came on stage and they could all harmonize and sing beautifully. But what brought the crowd to their feet was the very end of the performance, where rather than standing up and bowing to the audience, all of the sisters would stand up and turn their back on the audience like this. And they all showed off their magnificent hair. And everyone oohed and ahed at how tremendous their hair was. If you look at all the different sisters, it was very long. Victoria, 7 feet, Mary, 6 feet, Grace, 5 feet. Poor Sarah only had 3 feet of hair. Now, we see celebrities, so it was a total of like 37 feet of hair there on stage. And we see celebrities today sometimes that have long hair. But the difference with these Sutherland sisters was that it was not only long, it was incredibly thick and luxurious hair. I mean, they could cover their whole body in their hair if they wanted to. So they went on the road in 1876 with these singing Sutherland sisters. And the father initially booked them into they would call them, oh, by the way, let's introduce you. There was one boy in the family, Charles. He was quite young. And there was Sarah, the oldest, Victoria, Naomi, Grace, Isabella, the baby of the family, Dora, and Mary. And we'll talk about them a little bit more individually in a little bit. So the father booked them and they toured the world actually for a total of 15 years. But when they initially started out, the father was booking them in what they call kind of like dime museums. There were a lot of people around that were kind of wannabe P.T. Barnums, wanted to open that kind of a big museum like that, but they didn't have the money. So they would do something kind of smaller and they would bring in these kind of different attractions. And he was booking them in there. But finally, they got some much larger venues. Their brother Charles was in the act for a while. He was singing baritone, but they decided instead he shouldn't be singing. They wanted him to do this stuff in the beginning to kind of hand out the tickets and manage things because they didn't want one of the sisters doing that because it gives away the big surprise at the end when they turn around and they show their hair. So they started to get some better bookings. And one of the things that kind of put them on the map was down south, they had a series of what was called cotton expositions. And it was kind of to show the world that the South was coming back from the Civil War and they were ready to open their doors to do business. And there was a series of exhibitions they held in different cities in the South to kind of show off their technology. And as part of that, they would bring in different shows and act. And the Sutherland sisters played at 3 of these large exhibitions. And they got booked with a circus, the W. Cole's Colossal Circus, as one of their acts to come out. Now, they were paid quite well. They were getting over $3,000 a week for performing in this circus. So they were starting to make some serious money at this. Now, there was James Bailey, who was the team of Barnum and Bailey. And he had a nephew by the name of Henry Bailey. And Henry Bailey always had his ear to the ground for new things, perhaps for Barnum and Bailey or things that he can get into. And he got word of these Sutherland sisters at this small circus, and he went to check them out, and he thought they were just magnificent, especially their lead singer, Naomi. we thought was quite cute, was quite taken with him. So he talked the gals into saying, let me manage you because I think I can get you into something a little bit better. And so he booked them into a much, much larger circus, the Adam Fourplow and Sells Brothers shows, which was really a contender right up there with Barnum and Bailey as being one of the largest circuses in the country. Well, when P.T. Barnum and Bailey found out about, oh, I should say, the other thing that he was able to garner that was a big coup for the sisters was a command performance between Queen Victoria. So they were able to go to England and perform before the Queen their singing act and turn around and show their magnificent hair. And the Queen was, we are amused. She liked it a great deal and gave her seal of approval. Well, with going to a competing circus, plus, and they publicized this a great deal in terms of this command performance. They were putting out postcards and different advertisements that were showing them they're all performing before royalty. Well, the Barnum and Bailey, P.T. Barnum and Bailey got their kind of hair up, if they had any, saying, oh my goodness, we've got this sensational act going on that one of our biggest competitors have. They're performing for the Queen. We need to steal this act. So they went and they tried to get the act away from the other circus, but they said, no, they're under contract and we're not going to let them go. You can't have it. That was their chief, ace in the hole to compete against the big Barnum and Bailey circus. But Barnum and Bailey were not to be deterred because they wanted the Sutherland sisters. So they just bought that entire competing circus just to get the Sutherland sisters into their circus. So they signed them not as one of their circus acts, but as a featured musical act. They built a separate music pavilion that was going to kind of sit beside their major kind of three-ring circus tents, and they were going to feature musical acts, and the headlining act was going to be these marvelous Sutherland sisters. And they billed them as following: the 7 most pleasing wonders of the world, direct from their personal performance for Her Majesty the Queen. Well, now we had Honeoye Bailey managing the sisters, getting them into the big time of Barnum and Bailey Circus, and they were all set. Well, what happened to the father that was kind of managing the act before and kind of got pushed aside? Well, he still had some tricks up his sleeve. He said, I discovered the lost recipe. I found my wife's old recipes from her making soap and shampoo, and I found her shampoo recipe, which was the secret to all of these gals getting that luxurious long hair. And he started manufacturing his lucky number 7 for the 7 sisters hair grower. Got a hold of an artist, and he had a artist draw a picture of him, but erase all the hair, because he had plenty of hair. But he was going to show that it was before and after pictures, that he was totally bald, and he used this tonic, and he could show all the audience how much hair he grew through this tonic. Plus, he gave it to the daughters, and the daughters grew all this magnificent hair. And he marketed this not only to balding men, but to women as well. Because at that time, there was a series of patent medicines out there that had some noxious ingredients that was causing temporary hair loss among women. And they were looking around for various solutions. Well, Harry Bailey wound up marrying Naomi in 1885 and kind of took over the hair business from the father. He didn't feel it was really kind of being managed quite well. So what he did is he refocused the advertising. Rather than being on these before and after pictures of the bald guy and the hairy guy, right? He said he's going to feature the Sutherland sisters more as kind of like a beauty shampoo. An ideal shampoo, the 7 Sisters Scalp Cleaner, 7 Sisters Hair and Scalp Wash, the Hair and Scalp Cleanser. And that's how we kind of repositioned the product. And you can see these various advertisements, and he made the focus of it the 7 Sutherland sisters with the longest and most beautiful hair in the world due to this hair grower. And this was incredibly successful the way he did it. And he even did a line of children's shampoo where he emphasized an early start. If you start your young child on this, their hair will grow and grow and grow. Once he took over the business, they sold over $90,000 worth of product in the first year of this shampoo. And it was the right product at the right time, because right about this time, at the end of the 1800s, in terms of fashion, women were switching out of wearing hats and wigs and going more to their natural hair with some type of a natural hairstyle as the focus. And Henry Bailey jumped on this with a kind of key advertising theme. His big theme was saying, it's the hair, not the hat, that makes a woman attractive and draws the men in. And he put that little saying on all the advertisements. Now, a lot of competitors were jumping into this market as well because they saw this trend as well, away from the hats and the wigs and into these natural hairstyles. So they responded, Henry Bailey responded with saying, well, let's come out with something they don't have, which would be a full line of products. I'll augment the shampoo and scalp cleanser with hair dyes, combs, various toilet articles, so we could sell a whole line to the dealers. Well, they did have some of this that was left into the modern days, and people did send it to chemists to find out what exactly was in this secret formula. And what it was a combination of witch hazel, bay rum, salt, magnesium, but basically it was a formula for a clarifying shampoo. And actually a pretty good clarifying shampoo. It worked quite well. And it was a product that was really needed in its time because a lot of the shampoos and cleaners of those ages did leave a lot of residue in your hair. So this was a very useful product and was providing very good service to customers in terms of what it was actually delivering. And you could see they had this campaign, it's the hat, not the hair. And you could see the advertisement in the middle for hair dye, the colorator, a before and after picture of the woman's hair color. They even had special bottles made and manufactured for this, all done over in Lockport, New York. They had several factories. I'll show you that in a bit. Now, the sisters went around and did a lot of promotional appearances and became extremely famous. And they drew huge crowds. When they came down the street, there'd be legions of people trying to get their autograph or a snippet of their hair. If they got an autograph so they could sign some kind of a product label or one of these photographs, it was suitable for framing in their home. And the children especially would all trail behind because it was said their hair was so thick, the birds would make nest in there. So the kids would look and try to see if a bird was going to fly out of their hair. One of the things they used to do is pose in different store windows to bring in the customers. And it would bring in huge crowds over in the city of Chicago. They had a judge actually order an injunction to stop them from posing in the windows because so many hundreds of people were gathering, it would literally stop traffic in the street and block things up. Now it's quite common that we see celebrities pushing beauty products, but the Sullivan sisters were the first. They were the very first beauty celebrities. They formed a very large corporation. They had branch offices in Philadelphia, Chicago, Paris, London, New York City, and Havana. They had manufacturing plants in New York City, Toronto, Lockport, and they had a network of 28,000 dealers that stretched worldwide. They became very rich and famous, making many millions of dollars. So what did they do with kind of all this money when they were going? Did they move out to giant mansions over there on Park Avenue and New York City or down in Chicago in their famous area of mansions? Well, not quite. And I'll tell you what they wound up doing instead. But before that, let's meet some of these sisters and talk about them a little bit more. Sarah was the oldest. She was quite musically gifted. She was quite religious, and she was never seen without her little leather Bible. But she was the one originally in church that used to arrange all of the church music for the sisters. And when they went on the road, she was the one that accompanied them on the organ or other several instruments that she played. And she also did all of the vocal arrangements. Victoria had the longest hair at 7 feet, and she liked the finer things in life. It was rare to see her without some diamonds on her fingers or gold around her neck. She really had a taste for expensive things. Isabella was interesting because, other than her long hair, she really didn't look at all like one of the sisters. She was quite thin and slight, where the other gals were more well built, and she had a fairly kind of thin face where they're all kind of a larger face, and she had darker eyes, where many of the sisters had blue eyes. So she was a little bit of the dark horse in the family. I think it made her somewhat self-conscious about quite not maybe not quite as good looking as her sisters were. Grace was very funny, had beautiful auburn hair and blue eyes. She was kind of the mom of the sisters, that anybody that was disagreeing and fighting, she would always calm over all the disagreements and get everybody together and get everybody to cooperate. She was very organized. She was the one that would handle most of the correspondence for the business. Naomi had beautiful curly hair, was the finest singer in the group, and had quite the figure. She was heavily involved on the sales end of the business in terms of making new customers and calling on new dealers and such. Dora was the youngest and was probably, they used to call her the cute one, the most attractive. And she was kind of like Ellie Mae Clampett on the Beverly Hillbillies, that she had this big menagerie of pets. And was how she got her nickname of Kitty. But she had tons and tons of pets that she loved. She was also very involved in the business. She was the one who basically brought in the country of Canada and kind of shepherded that whole business and brought that online. Mary has a bit of a spacey look about her when you look at her photos. She suffered from mental illness off and on throughout her life. Well, as I mentioned, they were millionaires now, and they could go any place and do anything. They could live in Paris, London, or whatever. And instead, what they did is they went back to the family farm. And in place of that log cabin that was there, instead, they built a huge mansion up there in Warren Corners, New York. And it was quite the mansion. It had 14 rooms. Each of the sisters had their own bedroom. Each bedroom had a marble lavatory with hot and cold running water. They had a huge tank in the attic that the servants had to keep filling to have the running water. And they had lavatories downstairs, which was quite unheard of at this time. Their beds were all imported from Europe, black walnut woodwork and hardwood floors, massive crystal chandeliers. And they lived quite extravagantly. They gave very generously to many charities. As soon as I heard somebody was in need, someplace they were there to wire money or send money to these people. They hated to see anybody suffer. Each sister had her own personal maid and servant to brush and untangle their hair. And actually, they kept all of that hair from the brushes because they had another promotion where they had these big 3-foot dolls. There were 7 dolls to resemble each of the 7 sisters, and they had hair from each of the sisters on the doll. And they would put these out as kind of promotional pieces for people to see. Oh, they loved their pets, and they had a lot of them, and they really pampered them. They not only had a winter wardrobe to dress them in warm sweaters in the winter, but they had a summer wardrobe as well. They did a lot of things for the community, and also they did a lot of parties for the community. They would host large free galleries where they'd invite anybody in for the community and have all this food there with fireworks in the end. And they used to have a lot of different ice cream socials for all the children that were in Warren Corners. And of course, they spent on themselves. Here they are pictured in their $1,000 fur coats. And you can't blame them because it gets pretty cold there in northern Niagara County in the wintertime. Well, you had 7 ladies. Only one of them was married, and they're all living by themselves in this mansion. And wow, did it get a lot of gossip and rumors. And what are those gals doing up in that mansion? So they found out that they got some bicycles. Oh my goodness, ladies riding bicycles. That was scandalous in this time. They couldn't believe they were doing that. So rather than riding through the town and scandalize, get more scandal, the Seven Sisters built a track up on their property where they could ride these bicycles around their track. But then another big scandal and gossip rose because they were riding around the track in their bathing suits. Oh my goodness, how could a woman be doing something like this? And here's a picture of the bathing suits that they were shockingly riding around their bicycles in. Only three sisters married, and only one of them had children, which was Naomi. And it's maybe not too surprising because they were constantly on the road. I mean, they were traveling for 15 years, whether it was their singing act or doing these promotion for their hair care products. The Civil War was going on through a lot of this period, and there was a shortage of men after the Civil War. And also, the divorce and marriage laws were such at a time that they were really risking their fortune by getting married. I mean, someone could very easily marry them and get just about all their money, and they had very little recourse in court to get it back. Plus, they were always by themselves. And growing up as children, they really just kept to themselves and they were on the road and they were themselves. So they were their kind of their own best friends growing up, and that's how it was throughout their entire life. Now, Naomi and Henry, who were married, had three children, a daughter, which they also named Naomi, Harry, and Fletcher. Fletcher was kind of the wild child. He was just anything he could do to take a risk and dare that he was going to do it. So World War I broke out, and he was like a week away from joining the army in World War I, and he thought he would kind of sow his wild oats, and he went on a daring motorcycle. Oh, I shouldn't. I'll get that in a second. He went on a daring motorcycle ride, and he crashed and killed himself. Now, Naomi unfortunately died when she was only 35 years old of stomach cancer. So Grace, who was the mom of the family, stepped in to raise the three children. And as I mentioned, when they got older, Fletcher wound up killing himself when he was about 18 before he was going to go into the service for World War I. Harry was much more grounded and was an excellent student. He wound up going to Harvard University. And he was very involved there as in his academic studies, as well as being quite the athlete. Unfortunately, he was stricken with polio while he was at Harvard and had to wear leg braces, which cut his athletic career short. But he still graduated, and he was a very astute fellow, and he became one of the leading managers of the Larkin Soap Company. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with Buffalo history, but the Larkin Soap Factory was the largest soap factory in the world. They had a giant factory in Buffalo, New York. As a matter of fact, their kind of administrative building, you can see it pictured there on the upper left, was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, and is considered one of his masters in terms of a building office buildings. There's another picture on the right of the giant atrium in there. So he rose up quite high in the ranks there. Now, Naomi kind of got the entertainment bug from her mother. Went to Hollywood there. She's in Hollywood posing with some people. And here's her. And she's posing here with her three children, which would be Naomi's grandchildren. And as she went on some kind of a movie project she was going to do in China, and unfortunately she caught some kind of a fever. They believe it was scarlet fever, and died. And there was quite the custody battle over her children between her husband and then the Sutherland sisters. Isabel Sutherland, the one who was kind of different, did not marry well at all. She, kind of on a lark, married this Lord Frederick Castlemaine, who said he was of royalty vintage over there in England, though he didn't have a penny to his name. And he was quite the bizarre fellow. He was a morphine addict, and he would sit on the porch of this mansion, and if a wagon would go by, he had a rifle right there, and he'd try to shoot out the spokes of the wagon. If he was successful and the wagon wheel crashed, the farmer would come mad. He'd run out with a bundle of money and give it to the farmer to pay him off. And finally, at one point, he wound up getting a crush on the younger sister, Dora, who promptly rejected him. And he got so rejected, he wound up overdosing on morphine and dying. Isabel, just a couple weeks after his death, wound up marrying this other guy who was basically just a gold digger and said he was going to take her away and they were going to set up a competing hair business. And he took her away, but Isabel died actually only a year or so after that. Victoria did marry, but she married at the age of 50. And she created quite the scandal because she married a preacher's son who was only 19 years old. And that was quite the scandal. And she was the first one to ever kind of move away from home. She got married and then she moved over to New York City. And she only lived there about a year and a half, less than 2 years, and died of liver cancer. Many people think that she kind of knew she was dying of liver cancer before this, and she decided that she just wanted to get married and do this thing before she passed away. The sisters were very close and kept to themselves, but they were reported by everyone to be extremely kind-hearted. Their isolation and their fame made them subject to many rumors, most 99% of them totally false. They spent through their fortune, pretty much, but they didn't have anyone to leave it to anyhow, so they might as well take it with them, right? The hair business kind of collapsed in the 20s because fashion changed and everybody went into bob haircuts. So the appeal for having this long hair and all these kind of hair products really, really dwindled down into the marketplace. We may have heard more about them, but one of the things that didn't work out was MGM wanted to do a movie about the seven Sutherland sisters in 1923. So Mary, Grace, and Dora went over to Hollywood to talk to MGM about producing the movie and work on the script. And unfortunately, while they was there, Dora stepped off the curb and was hit and killed by a car, which was kind of quite new in those days in terms of automobiles. And the other two sisters just got so depressed they dropped the movie project and went back to Cambria. Here's the sisters and how old they were when they passed away and when they passed away. The last two surviving sisters were Grace and Mary, and Grace lost most of her eyesight and was trying to take care of Mary, who had mental problems. So she kept herself to just one room of the mansion because her eyesight was so bad. It was trying to take care of Mary. And the son, Harry Bailey, the grandson, I should say, or the grandnephew, I should say, who was the executive at the Larkin Company, wanted them to move out of that house and move in with him into his mansion. And they refused. So he kind of cooked up this thing with the county to kind of get them committed to this infirmary to kind of force their hand so he can move them back into his mansion, which he was able to do where they lived out the rest of their lives. The Sutherland Mansion was kind of purchased by this carpenter family who opened it up for tours and kind of as a bread and breakfast, but they didn't keep up the mansion very well. And as a result, they never cleaned the chimneys, and then there were sparks coming out into the attic, which set the attic on fire and the roof on fire. And the phone rang at the house, and the carpenters picked it up, and it was the neighbor saying, "Don't you know your house is on fire?" And they came out, and the whole house was in blaze. And this is an actual photograph of the mansion in blaze that somebody took. The seven Sutherland sisters, some of the first women business, incredibly successful millionaires, and unlike the robber barons of their era, they gave away their fortunes to charities at the start, and they didn't really step on and take advantage of people to get their money. They were quite ethical businessmen, and they did it with a good product that was useful to the world. Let me change, and let's talk about another person from history. Most people have read about P.T. Barnum and the big museum he had down there in New York City that unfortunately burnt to the ground. But Rochester had its own P.T. Barnum, a fellow by the name of Peter Gruber, known as Rattlesnake Pete. He had a huge museum, two giant buildings full of all types of oddities, just like P.T. Barnum had. He had an Egyptian mummy and a two-headed calf and a three-legged chicken and a 3,000-pound stuffed horse, tanks filled with snakes and jars of pickled brains. He had New York's first electric chair, a pipe said to have been smoked by John Wilkes Booth, a weight used in the last hanging in the city, 100-year-old harpsichord, stuffed animals and lizards of all kinds, an axe used by a wife murderer reported to be Lizzie Borden's, the skull of a horse of Civil War General Philip Sheridan, a $20 gold piece lying on the bar that was wired to shock anybody who tried to touch it, the battle flag of Custer's last stand, a shingle from the Johnstown flood, and I could go on and on and on about the thousands of items he had in these two large buildings and museums. He was a curator and he wore rattlesnake clothes. He had a coat made out of rattlesnake skin, a vest made out of rattlesnake skin, and a hat made out of rattlesnake skin. And that's why he went by the name of Rattlesnake Pete. But that's not how he was born. He grew up as Peter Gruber in 1875 in Oil City, Pennsylvania, which is just south of Erie. And they were German immigrants, his parents, and his parents ran a German restaurant there in Oil City. But he wasn't really that much into the restaurant. He was an outdoors kid. He wanted to do anything and everything that had to do with the outdoors. And because of that, he used to hang out a lot with the local Seneca Indians because he wanted to pick their brains about everything they knew about working in the outdoors and how to survive out there and different plants and different animals. So one day he was surprised to see an older Indian woman dragging an enormous dead rattlesnake behind her. And he said to the woman, "Well, what are you going to do with that rattlesnake? My goodness, are you going to eat it?" And she says, "No, no, 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 no. I'm going to milk the venom and I'm going to use it as medicine." And he couldn't believe this. And he said, "Well, when you're done, can I have the snake?" And she said, "Sure." So he took the snake and he skinned it, and he looked at it, he studied it, and he got fascinated by snakes. And he read everything he could find about snakes, and he talked to the Seneca Indians about everything they knew about snakes. He was especially interested in what this woman was doing in terms of using the snake venom as some type of medicine. Now, that's not that odd because in those days, what we call homeopathy was very common. This idea that like cures like. And it's not surprising that you give someone some kind of a poison to cure them from poison because back then, I mean, one of the new things that was coming out was vaccines, right? You give somebody smallpox and they get an immunity to catching smallpox. He was very physically active besides being a big outdoorsman. He used to box and wrestle and be a gymnast. Plus, he used to go around a lot catching snakes and getting a large collection of them, live snakes. Well, what he was going to do for a living was be a blacksmith. And he was an excellent blacksmith, and he was actually the best blacksmith in the shop that he worked, even though he was left-handed, which is quite a feat because blacksmith tools are all built for right-handed people. So the owner saw how talented he was, and he offered to finance him to go to a special school of blacksmithing to learn how to make parts for steam locomotives, which is a big thing in demand. So he was ready to attend this school, but unfortunately his father became ill and he had to go and take over the restaurant. So he started managing it, and he decided, well, he needs to bring in more business. So he got this idea to share his hobbies with everyone. He brought in exhibits of his live snakes. And also as a blacksmith, he was very much into making little inventions, miniature oil wells, miniature little devices that would move things back and forth or wave a flag. And he had these little mechanical things he built, plus all the snake collection to bring in business. And business was doing quite well. But unfortunately, one of the things Oil City is known for is floods. And there was a large one that flooded out the restaurant. And the father said, I'm getting old. I think I'm just going to close down the place rather than trying to rebuild and reopen the restaurant. Well, at this point, Peter had a wife and a young child. and said, well, let's see now. The blacksmith stuff didn't kind of work out now. Maybe I should keep with the restaurant business. So he went down to Pittsburgh with the idea that he was going to open a similar restaurant, but the people in Pittsburgh said, no snakes. And he says, well, I got to have the snakes. That's the big draw. So he went up to Jamestown and he wanted to, and he said, no, no snakes. Went up to Buffalo, tried, no, no snakes. So he had a relative that was over in Rochester and he wrote over to her and she said, you know something? I checked with the city and the ordinances and there's no problem with snakes over here. And he says, great. So he had the idea that he was going to go big with this. And he was not just going to have little side exhibits in the restaurant, but he was going to basically have a museum with the restaurant on the side. And the restaurant on the side wouldn't be some little diner thing. He was going to have a very high-end saloon with the best wines and liquors. And he was going to have a great tobacco store and smoking room with the finest imported cigars and tobaccos there. And to locate this, he wanted to locate it in the heart of Rochester, but it was very difficult to get real estate there. So what he did is he located it right behind the Reynolds Arcade building, right at the Four Corners, right in back of it, at 8 and 10 Mill Street. And he bought 2 large warehouses there and converted them into these museums as well as his high-end saloon and smoke shop. And there's a picture, you guys see that Rattlesnake Pete there with all of that stuff there. And actually, those back alleys were a rough neighborhood, but the gangs really got along with Rattlesnake Pete because they were fascinated with his snakes and all of his exhibits there. You can see all of that stuff hanging at every square inch. He had stuff there. And if you see these 3 animals there, those aren't stuffed dogs. Actually, those are the real thing. He found 3 large St. Bernards that he had. And actually, they were pictured in a lot of his advertisements. They were called Marcus, Brutus, and Nero. Marcus, Brutus, and Nero. Rattlesnake Pete said, you know, I didn't like the saloon business. I never really liked it. What I was really into all along was my collections of things to exhibit, my snake hunting, and also all this homeopathy I was doing. And he spent a lot of time treating people for snake bite. They would come to him all over where he had this kind of snake venom that he would treat people. And he also had his own cures using snake. He, for example, when people would come to him with goiter, he had this cure, like 3 treatments, where they would wrap a live snake around your neck for like about 30 minutes. And he swore for a younger person, he had an 85% cure rate by doing that. He was actually quite well known to the established medical community because he was the major supplier in the Northeast region of rattlesnake venom that they used for anti-venom when someone got a rattlesnake bite. He passed away at the age of 75. It's amazing that he didn't die before that because he was bitten by poisonous snakes over 33 times. And you can see a picture of his hand, how necrofied it was from the dead tissue from getting bit by a snake that many times. Matter of fact, the doctors said that when he died, the only reason he probably survived 33 times on these snake bites, which were severe. I mean, one snake bite, he wound up going into a coma for like about 30 days. Another snake bite, he was in the hospital for like about 6 months. So it was quite severe, but he was a pretty big, strong guy and could fend it off. But the doctor said the snake bites probably caught up with him because he died of kidney failure. And they figured that basically his kidneys probably gave out from trying to process all of the poison from all of those snake bites he had through the years. Here's Rattlesnake Pete and his dogs. And the obituary in the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle said, although he bore the name of Rattlesnake Pete for more than half a century, it was as foreign to his genial and humorous disposition as his unfailing kindness and courtesy as any nickname could be. And when he treated people for any of his medications or snake bite, he did it totally free. He never charged anybody. And when the hospitals needed venom for anti-venom, he supplied that totally free as well. He refused to take any payment for something that he thought could be a cure or could help people. Peter Gruber, aka Rattlesnake Pete, you can see his grave up there in Holy Sepulchre Cemetery, up there in the north part of Rochester off of Lake Avenue. Thank you very much for listening about fun Western New York history, and maybe I'll be back sometime to show you the second and third presentations in this series. Now I'll open it up to questions and see if anybody has anything to ask about either the Sutherland sisters or Rattlesnake Pete. We have to unmute ourselves.
Yes. Anybody has a question, feel free to unmute yourselves at this time. And thank you so much, Jack. That, as usual, was very educational.
Now, wasn't that fun history?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and that is, I'm just wondering, where did Rattlesnake Pete get all these rattlesnakes from and such? There aren't that many snakes inside, I didn't think, in the New York area.
But there is.
Well, first off, we're talking back a long time ago, right? It wasn't as developed as it was today. And there's still a lot of rattlesnakes in New York State. If you go into central and eastern New York State, there's quite a few rattlesnakes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. There's not only rattlesnake, but there's also copperheads in this area as well. He got bit by both. Actually, what happened to his big menagerie is when he passed away, his daughter wasn't interested in running the museum. So his lawyer kind of held a giant auction. And people came from all over the country, because this museum was pretty famous, to buy up all these curiosities. And then whatever was left kind of sat in a warehouse for probably like another 10, 20 years. And finally, the lawyer just kind of disposed of it. But I believe the Rochester Museum and Science Center does have some items from the museum in their collection.
Very interesting.
So we have a typed question here, and the typed question is from Jane Grant. Does the museum building still stand?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The question is, does the museum building still stand? I think my audio might sound garbled to some of you.
I don't know the answer to that question. You know, I've never gone down Mill Street to see how old those buildings are. I have a feeling they're still there. I'm going to have to drive down Mill Street and check that out for myself. Obviously, the Reynolds Arcades building. I don't know. I'll have to. You got my curiosity up. I'm going to have to drive over there in the next week or so and check out and see if those old warehouses are still there or not. I wouldn't be surprised if they were.
Charles is in the background here. He did a little research and he's found out that it is no longer there.
It's no longer there. Oh, too bad.
How about the Frank Lloyd Wright building in Buffalo that you mentioned?
Oh, unfortunately, that was demolished. And many architectural historians in the Buffalo area always wring their hands over that because of all the different architecture. And they've got some beautiful architecture in the Buffalo area. That was probably the crown jewel, the Larkin building.
Well, I'm going to say once again, after you've done so many great presentations for us, Jack, this was another bang up job. So you kept us all entertained and warm on this night, and we look forward to having you again. And I know we will. And thank you all for attending. And we look forward to seeing you at other presentations this year. So Happy New Year again to all. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Night.
Thank you.
Bye.
That was very interesting.